Hey, today I'm going to be talking about Space IDE, which is a zero-code development environment, or as we like to call it, the fifth gen of programming. It's an awesome new way to build your apps, so let's just get started. So we're going to be making a Heroes app where you can create your own hero. You can have an awesome hero name, a secret code, and obviously superpowers. Then you can log in into your own Heroes universe, upload other heroes, check out your own profile. Oh wow, 3 likes. And that's about it. So let's open the Space IDE. You can create your own free account by signing up. I already have one, so I'll use that. So let's log in. As you can see, there are no applications here. So I'll go ahead and create my first application called Be the Hero. A little heads up, we'll be talking about the back-end side of things and not the front end. If you want to see how the front end is made, you can check out our GitHub repository. The link is in the description below. So Be the Hero will have HTTP as its communications protocol and MySQL as its database. So let's go ahead and set that up first. I prefer using Docker for running my databases, so I'm going to do just that. Just don't forget to expose the ports. So my personal favorite is MySQL Workbench. You can use any other tool you like. I'm going to punch in my database password. And this is my database. So first we need to create our schema. Let's call it hero and apply. Next would be creating the tables. These are my table queries. If you can see, I have 3 tables. One to store the details of the hero, the account and password. The second to hold the powers, and the third for the upvotes. I'm going to go and execute these queries. And my database is set up. So coming back to Space IDE, I'm going to open my app, which gets me to the canvas, which is the main area where we're going to write our application. Right-click on the project name and create a new file, or also a flow. So I'm going to create a login flow. On the right, as you can see, there are various actions. There are communication protocols like HTTP WebSocket, and there are databases. So I'm going to start by putting an HTTP receive block. So the way to put it is left click on the block and left click on the canvas. And that's how you add an action to the canvas. Double click that action to open the configuration of that canvas. So I'm going to add an endpoint. It's a HTTP post method. Now the body of this request is going to be in JSON. And the fields of the JSON object is going to be mapped directly to the internal variable. I know for a fact that the front end is going to send me an account and pass or password field. And that's going to be mapped to the variable directly accessible in the args scope. The next step would be to add a MySQL query to check whether the account really exists. So here I'll click on the MySQL block and click on the action after which the query needs to be executed. It asks me a condition, whether on success of the previous block or on failure of the previous block should I add this new action. I'm going to click success. Double click, and I'll type in my SQL query right here. Speaking about variables, all the variables by default are stored in the args scope. So args.result is where I want to store the result of this particular query. It's going to be a single operation. I expect a single row to return. If the query returns more than a single row, it will be rejected. And if it returns 0 rows, it's going to throw an error. On the contrary, all is when you want all the rows to be returned as an array. Even 0 rows would be a valid operation. So I'm going to stick with 1 here. And don't forget, this is a prepared query. The question marks you see? So I need to pass in parameters to the SQL query to make it complete. So I'm going to pass args.account, which I mentioned I'll be receiving from the HTTP block, and args.pass. These are the JSON fields which I was talking about earlier. Now on the success of my MySQL query, I want to store the account name in a cookie. So I'll add a set cookie block on the success of my MySQL query. The name of the cookie would be account. It's not going to be an HTTP only cookie. The expiry time is going to be 20 minutes. Here it's in seconds. And I'll add the field which I want, which is account. And the variable which holds the account value is called args.account, as you may recall. The type is string. And that's about it. Once everything is successful, I will be adding an HTTP response block to send a JSON response back to the client on success of the set cookie, obviously. And it's just going to return a status code of 200. There are no parameters which I want to pass to the client at this point. Now let's take into account the errors which may happen. So again, go with the HTTP block. On error of the MySQL query, I'm going to throw a 404, a not found, a user not found error. The field is going to be error to trigger a notification. That's how the front end binding is done. In double quotes, I will be typing invalid credentials. And this is a type string. So instead of typing a variable in the form of args.variable name, I can directly type in a string and give it a type. Now I want a similar response when the cookie throws an error. It normally doesn't, but I don't want to take a risk. So I can copy and paste. So the way to copy is right click on that node and click on copy node. It copies that single node only. Another option would be copy flow from here, which signifies that all the nodes following that node would be copied and pasted where you want. The pasting operation is pretty much similar, where you right click and hit paste. Now this node will have the same configuration as the previous node which I copied it from. So I'll have to change that. I'll make it an internal server error, which is 500. And in the double quotes, I'll put, well, internal server error. So here I've completed my login flow. So heading to the next flow, which is going to be sign up. So I'll create the new flow and I'll name it sign up. So now again, put an HTTP receive block, open the configuration, add the endpoint. It's going to be a post method and submit. Now the client is going to be sending me 3 fields. One is going to be account. The next is pass, and the third one is an array of his superpowers. Now, since I want to insert into the database, I'm going to be using a MySQL exec on the success of the previous block. I'll type in the query, add the parameters, which is args.account and args.pass, and I'm done. Here I've created the user in the accounts table. Now I also need to add the superpowers in the powers table. Now since I'm getting powers as an array, I'll have to iterate over that array to make consecutive entries in my SQL database. So for that, we have flow controls such as iterate blocks and iterate end. So on success of the previous query, I will iterate. I'll define a new scope name which is limited to the scope of this iteration. I'll call it ITR1. And the variable to iterate on would be args.powers. Now here I need to make successive MySQL queries. So I'll take the exec block on success. I'm going to punch in my query and I'm going to add the parameters. The first one is going to be args.account and the second one is going to be itr1.row. Now every element inside this array is going to be presented to me in the form of the scope name .row. This is how I can directly access that particular element. Don't forget to end the iterate block. Now towards the end, I'm going to reset the cookie and send a response. So I'll send a response first, and the response status is going to be 200, and that's about it. And I'll add the cookie block. Set the parameters which I originally had and hit submit. Now let's take the error blocks. So I can take it from the previous flow, copy it, and paste it on the error. Now we also need to add a response if the user already exists. So for that, I will copy the previous block and paste it here on failure. And I'll change the message to hero already exists. Before we forget, we did not add the scope in the iterate end block. And that's supposed to be ITR1, the same scope we opened it with. Let's save these files before we lose them. And that's it. Before we go ahead, let's go and download the SpaceExec file. You can get it on our Get Started page. Choose the binary according to your environment. The standard package is something you will be interested in. The Windows users do not have SQLite 3 support as of this date. I'm going to stick with Mac. Download the file and store it somewhere on your path environment variable so you can easily access it from anywhere. To test it out, type SpaceExec-V and that shows you the current version. And this is 0.615 which I'm using. Now SpaceExec needs a config file to run to figure out which flows it's supposed to download. So let's go ahead and make one. This is the default config which is going to be used for this application. It's got a login block which has account. Account is the account you logged into Space ID with. There's a key and app ID which I'll be explaining further later on. Branch is always going to be prod. The port number is the port to listen on when we start the SpaceExec file. DVS are your various database connections. So here for MySQL, I have my connection string as mentioned here. I want to be hosting the front end directly from the SpaceExec, and that is why I'm going to host my static folder. The index.html file is going to be hosted separately, and that is why I'm going to put it in my files block. Our cookie is going to be encrypted, and that is why I have an auth key and an encrypted key. Make sure you don't share it with anybody. Feel free to use this config file so you can use the flows I have made in this tutorial. I'm just going to save it here. We now will have to download the front end, and for that, you can visit our GitHub page on SpaceExec/BeTheHero, copy the URL, and clone the project. Go inside the folder newly created and hit npm install. This will install your React file and all the dependencies associated with it. You will also have to build the project, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go back and start the SpaceExec file by passing the configuration we just made, something like this. It's going to authenticate and download the flows as it has just now, and that's it. Open your browser to point to localhost 8090, the port we were listening on. As you can see, the app is live now. I'll go ahead and create my own hero. I'll call it Noreen. Add a password and give me some superpower strengths. And I'll create it. So now we don't see much because this part of the flows have not been made yet. But let's go ahead and check out the login function. I'll type the credentials I just created and it logs in. So our flows up till now are perfect. So now coming back to the flows, I'll create a new flow called fetch data. This is going to populate my leaderboard. I'll again start with the receive block, add the necessary configurations. Now I'll check the cookie to see whether the session actually exists. And for that I'll use getCookie, name of the cookie, and where I want to store it. I'm going to send the user an error if the cookie does not exist. It signifies that the user hasn't logged in yet. The status code is going to be 401 and the error will be session expired. If the cookie exists, I'm going to be doing a MySQL query to populate all the data. Put in the query, the variable I want to store it in, and this time the operation will be all. Similarly, I'll be fetching the other parameters. And finally respond with all the parameters I've just fetched. The status code would be 200. I'll populate the response fields and hit submit. And my fetch data flow is complete. You'd probably want to catch the errors as well, but I'm just going to ignore it for now. I'll create the next flow, which is upwards. I'm just going to copy the previous flow entirely and paste it here and change the endpoint. There exist colons in this URL. The parameter existing here will be converted to a variable named hero name, but I'll have to add it here. So I'll add hero name and give it a type. Similarly for power, and I'll save it. The get cookie part is going to be similar, but the queries will be changing. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete them. Now I'm going to add a MySQL exec block. Quickly type the query. The first parameter would be args.heroname. The second would be args.power. And the third is the user who's uploaded it, whose data we've taken from the cookie, right here. And I'll save it. I'll also be resetting the cookie here so that it doesn't expire as the user uses it. It's going to have the same parameters as the previous cookie, so I'm just going to save it. And finally, I'll add a response. It's going to be an empty response to signify an OK message. The other response would be on error for an internal server error. I'm just going to add it here and hit save. Here our upwards flow is complete as well. I'll add a new file and call it downwards. The downwards is going to be the exact copy of upwards, so I'm going to copy this entire flow and paste it right here. The only difference would be the query. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. And obviously the endpoint would be different as well. And that's it. We have missed out an important point. The downward is supposed to be the post query. Similarly for upward. So let's just fix that. Our entire Heroes app is complete. I'm going to save this and head back to the SpaceExec file to update it with the new flows. The way to do that is simply just close and restart SpaceExec. It will download the new flows automatically. So now our app is complete. I've truncated the table so we can start fresh. So this is the first user that has done before, and I'll create him. There's no fun for just a single user, so I'll log out and create another one. Now this is my second user. I can see myself here. I'll just upvote myself. Now if I log in using my account, I can see the upvote given to me right here. So our app is complete. This is the end for now. Do let us know if there's any aspect of the app you want us to cover and we can add it. Feel free to leave your comments and please subscribe. Thank you.